y'all doing? For this review, I'm going over to a classic piece of fantasy, that is Broken Sword by Poul Anderson. Now, I started hearing about this one through Michael Moorcock in his book Wizardry and Wild Romance, which is his take on describing the fantasy genre, its history, his critiques, and stuff like that, and what he likes and dislikes about it, how he thinks fantasy should be presented. One of the books he praises is The Broken Sword by Poul Anderson, of course. And this book came out at the same year Lord of the Rings did, 1954. And when he read that one, he found a very influential story, how it derived itself from the Norse Eddas and other forms of related mythologies, Celtic and all that, but mostly centered around Norse mythology. And I can see why, because Moorcock's famous character Elric Melniboné shares many elements from this book, and many of you may see as I describe it. So, I have two versions of this. I have this one based on the 1954 text. This one's, I got this at the Barnes & Noble right off the shelf, and this is a new edition. And I have this one, which is the 1971 edition. And I'll get to why I have them both in a bit. So, what's this story? Alright, and well, you may have known in certain forms of mythologies in Europe and all that, how fairies will come by and steal a human child and in its place put a changeling to, so while they take the child for their own purposes and all that. Well, this is the story involving this. It starts off with this one Dane who plunders these lands and settles in England and makes his own great hall, and he takes a wife, and he starts having a family, and his first child is born, and everybody's happy, and he's happy and all that, but he kind of upset the local priest, so it's going to take a few days for to get another one to give the child to christen the child. Well, during this lord's conquest, he wronged this one family whose surviving member is a witch, and she tells the witch to this elf earl named Imric, "Hey, this family right here just had a child. It's not christened yet." And Imric, seeing the advantages of a human child, particularly their advantage of being able to touch iron, which is deadly both elves and trolls. Well, he decides to take, and elves rarely have children, and this is a good opportunity. So he gets to work. He creates a changeling through a union of an elf and a troll he kept captive for 900 years. And when the child was quickly born, and through magic rituals and everything, he now and also put an enchantment on the child to look like the one he's about to take. He goes in, quickly snatches and switches the child without the mother noticing at all. And now the game is set, so to speak. Little did they know, of course. For who knows their fates with a one set for them. So, now the children are set families. You have the changeling with the human family, and you got the human child with the elf royalty and everything. As for the one who was taken, Skaflik, who's named, everyone's happy. Lords are giving him naming gifts, but a particular suspicious one came from one of the Aesir, the Norse gods, Skanir, gives him for a naming gift a broken sword. Says, and there will be a time he'll have this reforged by a giant of Jotunheim, and he'll need this in time of great need. Well, they put it away, mindful of it, but not going to think too much of it. But other than that, Skaflik grows up, not wanting for anything. He grows up strong and handsome for a human. He learns now the ways of the magic of the elves. He understands, he has the witch sight, so he can see into their world. He is a skilled bard and a wonderful fighter. I mean, he's got everything. He knows, and he knows he was taken from humans, but he doesn't care. He's got everything here. It's wonderful. It's carefree. He understands, the ways of nature, the ways of the elves. Well liked by everyone. Credit to his race. As for the changeling, despite the fact that he grows up in a great hall, in a well-off family, he is very brooding, uncaring. Animals run away from him, and is very strong, and he becomes a berserker. He goes on Viking raids, which is kind of expected of, but they're pretty vicious Viking raids. He has a bunch of low-life scum for his crew, to where it was so bad as far as like, you're not staying here, they could live in the next town over. But despite all he was given, he's, kind of a bad egg, of course. Later, he comes across a beautiful woman who turns out to be a witch. She tells him all of who he is, and what his whole life can mean. And she tells him that he is not a human born of them. He's a changeling of elf and troll stock. If you play her, she'll teach him a few tricks, and she says, "Go over to the trolls. They'll be having a war with the elves soon. And since you are descended from a troll who's been kept captive by this elf earl, who is actually the daughter of the king, and this is true, you'll be in a well-placed position. You get more than what you can ever ask for here, and have a purpose, despite your short-lived life." So he does that. Valgard, the changeling, goes about, ends up killing the majority of his family except for his two sisters, who aren't really his sisters when he finds out his own past. And he takes his men and takes them to the Troll King as offerings. Well, as he goes there, Imric, who's about to lay war on the trolls, and Skaflik, on his first, help lead the invasion. He goes in and they hit it hard, hit it fast, and they escape. But they escape with one of the human captives. The other one didn't make it. And this other human captive, Freda, she is taken to the elf home. Kind of, despite how wonderful she is, she's still of a Christian heart. But in the end, she ends up falling in love with Skaflik. And of course, despite all this, the trolls, in larger number than what was suspected, make a counterattack against the elves in England. And they are now trying, they lay waste across the land. The elves are at a major loss. The strongholds are taken. Whoever isn't killed are scattered. The elf women are, amorously onto the other side. They accept the trolls with warm welcome, easier to have to kill themselves. So that would lead with Skaflik and Freda, who, with their growing love, try to hide out and fight what they can. And then Skaflik remembers, hey, wait a minute. There may be a way to counter them. Then my naming gift, the broken sword. If I could go in and get it and have it reforged, I should be able to attack them all. So that's what he does. And of course, when more to find out where the giant is, they had to raise the dead, and the dead tell them what him and Freda's relationship is. Now, then, of course, you already find out who they were, because she's the daughter of the same man who is his father. So there's incest right there. In today's Game of Thrones, we shouldn't be surprised at those things, and it shouldn't be shocking that this happens in mythologies as well as older writings like this. So that's kind of about giving out a good. I may have spoiled by giving the first half of the book, but I wanted to lay groundwork. So all right, it's good. It's a great story, but I mentioned before there's two versions of this. One from 1954, which you pick up in a new edition, and you can find a good paperback like this with a Boris Vallejo. Let's see, it is Boris Vallejo's art. In 1971. What gives? Well, he wrote this in 54, and many people praise it. They like the fact of its strong connection to the Norse, the brutal, poetic Norse sagas and stuff like that, the Eddas and all that. But he rewrote it in 71 to sort of streamline the language. And I couldn't really notice instantly at first. I followed the main parts of the story without the actual words itself. But when I put both the books back to back in certain chapters, I noticed certain things missing. And here are some examples from a website. I'll link this down below so you could look about it. It's another review. But he has a side-by-side, some samples from 54 to 71. In 54, he will write a line, struck a waiting, rippling melody from his carven harp. In the 71 edition, he just writes, struck a chord on his harp. In 54, he wrote, a few snowflakes drifted down through the silent, bitter air. In 71, a few snowflakes drifted down. 54, the screaming fury of a storm. In 71, a storm. A mighty longing rose in his breast and nigh choked him. In 71, for a moment, longing overwhelmed him. It's things like that. The story has not changed. It's still the exact same. But the changes in the writing and verse from here to there, you kind of feel he wanted to sort of tell him in the introduction. He tells this like he's talking to his younger self about hey, he's not the same person he was. He wouldn't write in this manner anymore. So I have to admit there are parts about this I like in certain descriptions, like even a part like the very end of what happens to the two main characters after all the tragedy at the end battle occurs, which was skipped in the original version. However, a lot of people would probably agree that in the new one takes away it's not as wordy as much, but it's also not as poetic, which is one of the things that the original was praised for. So if you can, get both versions of these if you can find them. So just look at the copyright dates. 1954 version. This one says that this is based on the 1954 version. I picked this one up. This is 1971, and there are some clear differences. But in most cases, when we would have when we see something like this, we tend to praise like the original version more than the new one, or what have you. But I think more closer, it's like certain movies you might have. Like I would say, best example is this here Legend, the Ridley Scott film with Tom Cruise, Tim Curry, and all them. It's a nice fantasy movie if you haven't watched it. I know I said Tom Cruise, yes, that Tom Cruise, but if you haven't seen it, but Tim Curry does a wonderful evil being as darkness. Makeup effects is impressive, but I'm digressing. But this one right here, this comes with two versions. There's a U.S. release, but then there's the director's cut. And I grew up with the U.S. release, of course. My father rented it years ago, and I loved it. Wonderful soundtrack. It was great fairy tale, well-made fantasy story and all that. But then I saw the director's cut, which Ridley Scott was scared of how this movie will be received, so he changed the soundtrack, he re-edited it and everything, and that's how we got the U.S. release. And then, of course, you could quickly get the original director's cut, and you can see the difference. It tells the same story, but it's presented in certain ways. The different soundtrack is a more operatic experience. But I don't choose one or the other. I choose them both, and that's how I treat this. So my suggestion, if you can, it'd be hard to do, because I tried to look for this for almost a year at used bookstores. Yeah, I could have ordered online, but I'm glad I waited because I found this one for nice and cheap at half-price books and got the other one at Barnes & Noble. So, but if you can get them both, the 54 and 51, have them side by side, read them both. That's what I just did for this review. And yes, there are some differences, but I can't hate them both. It's the exact same story. He changed the wording from one version to the other, but still the same story. There is one part where he changed the character in a conversation in a very important part about who it is. So, but again, give it a go. The Broken Sword by Poul Anderson, a classic. While you may know Poul Anderson from a lot of his works in science fiction, he also does some fantasies as well, prolific as he is. But it's a wonderful piece to have in your classic collections if you want fantasy before it was kind of I don't want to say dumbed down, because there's some good stuff out there still that's brand new, but definitely get all the classics you can. Poul Anderson, Broken Sword should be on your list. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.